Okay, welcome back then. Early January 1858, and I tell you what, it's really nice to just spend time kind of playing this game without having to kind of worry about whether some battle's going to come off, whether we're about to lose some colossal engagement or something. It's been a really nice sort of period of just economic development, focusing on kind of laying the foundations for further development really, and looking to kind of offset some of the resource shortfalls that we have. So the main thing we're doing is continuing to develop central Anatolia with a focus on kind of mining. The mining in Zundalag is complete, although it's operating at a relatively low efficiency until the railroad connections have been sort of complete. We've got the sidings and the shunters moving coal around and speeding up the process. We've also got railroad development in Ankara, and also we're developing a coal extraction site there. And that should go some way to begin to kind of, I think it'll be a little while before we're going to be able to meet kind of domestic consumption for coal, which is very high, it has to be said now. So it's going to be a little while, and it's probably going to be dependent on exploiting these coal mining regions in the kind of southern Balkans, Niš, Petrik, and Kosovo. So that's going to be a long-term plan as well. But yeah, so far so good. In terms of our military plan, then, or our sort of army reform plan, that's going ahead really nicely. So we've got one army corps, guard corps, being constructed in Constantinople. We've got one that's really just completed. Our guard corps are mostly infantry, but they are kind of multi sort of combined arms. They're more complex kind of units than just infantry corps. These also contain light cavalry scouting forces, medium cavalry, and they contain a sort of a much more kind of elaborate core HQ, which just has a much bigger complement of officers. But anyway, one of these is completed now, and we're going to move this one towards Hussein Avni's force, the European sort of theatre force, and it's going to take 38 days, and we'll get that to enter structure once it is there. I'm toying with another idea as well, which we could do, and that is the two army corps that you remove from Hussein Avni's force and Abdul Karim Nadir. That's two army corps. That's like the lion's share of another army. It would need to build an additional corps, which would be a guard corps, of course. And I'm thinking we could construct a fourth army and have that maybe based in sort of central western Anatolia, maybe Ankara or something like this. I've not completely decided yet, but I'm thinking that's going to be a serious consideration. Instead of destroying the army corps, use this as an opportunity to actually expand the size of the army somewhat. And this could also go some way to sort of shape some plans we have. So for example, kind of green, sort of war plan green topaz, a defense against Russia. Having an additional army that we could either send to the east or maybe even as a holding force in the center to kind of guard Anatolia could be a real game changer, especially when you consider the last war against Russia. The Russians are really, really kind of adept at amphibious landings, at sort of trying to aggressively kind of make moves against our metropole, really, our kind of heartland. Having an army based in Ankara, would be really good to be able to use it to respond. It's a thought. I've not decided yet, but we could do that. It'd involve building probably another cavalry division or two, some independent artillery regiments and various support asset units, engineers, provosts, field hospital units, and so on and so forth. So that's a consideration, the construction of a fourth army as a part of the kind of army plan. So there's that. We've also begun the construction of a Corvette, screw Corvette squadron, which is partially constructed in Constantinople, and yeah, that's a part of the plan to basically we'll build an additional 3 squadrons, basically. That's going to take a little bit longer. It takes time to build ships. It's a bit more kind of an elaborate thing to do than just to kind of train and furnish infantry forces. So that's the army plan, basically. That's the expansion, possibly the significant expansion of the army, at the very least the creation or the enlargement of the kind of guard formation, whereby every army is basically organized around a guard corps. That's kind of going ahead, and that's going ahead swimmingly. The economy is looking good in terms of economic development in Anatolia, and things have stabilized somewhat in Yemen. We've recaptured the colonial fort, or not the colonial fort, I should say. We've recaptured Aden itself. The colonial fort was destroyed, as was the main fortress, but we've rebuilt the anchorage, and we're reconstructing the main fortress also. We've got a cavalry division that's just holding a position there for the time being, and we lifted a siege on Sana. But yeah, things are, much tougher now, like here, and once again, we're looking at sort of large Yemeni kind of insurgent forces, occupying the regions in between our forces and this sort of thing, and it's going to take time to whittle these forces down, I think. We have also begun the process, as I mentioned in the last video, of trying to develop a bit of colonial penetration and organising a bit of a kind of commercial presence then on the island of Sumatra. So in Acre itself, we've got a trading post which is being constructed. We achieved the colonial penetration required for that. We've got a mission, which is to say a mosque and a military mission that's attached to it, being built in Acre also, and we have colonial merchants operating there. We're doing the same in, let's have a look, Medan. Exactly the same, colonial trading posts going up, a mosque and a mission attached to it, and we have colonial merchants operating Medan, bringing up the bringing up the colonial penetration. Bit of a slower process in Sibolga. I think it's pronounced Sibolga. There are Dutch merchants there also. We've got merchants operating, and we're a little way off having the colonial penetration necessary to push for a trade post. Now, if the Dutch do that before us, it's not wasted. We get some colonial penetration, but what we'd really like is to establish a trade post here. And we're also going to be expanding this to... we've got colonial merchants in Jambi. This area is militarily controlled by the British. Again, don't really know why. I don't think the British have any kind of designs on Sumatra, but I suspected they just used it as a kind of maybe a staging ground for some kind of operation in Southeast Asia. But we've got colonial merchants operating there, and we'll be building a trade post, and that'll increase our tobacco access to tobacco slightly. And we'll do the same in Siak as well. So this is going to be a long-term operation, but it's something that I think is achievable. We're going to also be looking to send a marine detachment to Acre to occupy this area and to begin building a fortress here, to try and actually get a bit of military presence, which will be a kind of counterbalance to the Dutch position on the sort of southeast of the island. So that's going to be a consideration as well. Maybe a plan for this year, actually. In some ways, we got our hands full a little bit with Yemen, but on the other hand, Yemen is just one thing I'm really learning here is that we need to spend less money on things like trade posts where there's no chance, where there's a really high chance that trade post is going to be destroyed, because it's just throwing private capital away. It puts huge pressures, unnecessary pressures on private finance, and we don't want that happening. We want to make sure that we've got a lot of private finance and stockpiled, so we can begin to look at more serious kind of, I suppose, kind of industrial projects like railroads, mines, factories, this kind of thing. And that's the problem, is that these colonial it's okay if they're safe. It's okay if, for example, here, we invested a lot, and it's definitely paid for itself many times over through access to kind of diamonds and this sort of thing. But in Yemen, it'll be a long time, be decades before it pays for itself now, frankly. But if we can sort of do this, establish ourselves on sort of Western Sumatra without triggering any kind of upset from the natives, from the locals, then that would be good. That's what we're going to be looking to do, really, and establish a bit of military presence. Having kind of missions there for a long period of time would hopefully do that as well. It would kind of win over local tribes to our side. This kind of thing, they might accept that there's poor prospects for kind of an independent kingdom, I guess, that they have here, and that actually their future may lay with us. It's either us or the Dutch sort of thing, and we at least have the same religion. So that's that, really. That's the kind of plan, our kind of colonial project, really, a bit of a pet project. Now, we are also focusing on trying to consolidate our position in Hejaz. This is a long-term thing, and we're doing it in a careful way that doesn't sort of trigger any colonial revolts or anything like that. But we begin the construction of a road in Tabuk, and we're going to extend our road network further south, which will allow us slightly better access to Hejaz as well. But that's a long-term prospect, and it's also quite expensive. Roads require state revenue, they require private finance, and also it requires manufactured goods. And our kind of military plans have really begun to eat through manufactured goods. See, these are guard corps. They're not just kind of manpower heavy. They also require a lot of manufactured goods, a lot, much more so than other infantry corps, which gives you an idea of the kind of various specialist weapons and this sort of thing they might have. That's it. That's the last 3 months, really. The other thing that I've sort of started doing is in Constantinople, I've begun to expand the size of the naval base here. The naval base was a size 6. We've spent a bit of... I might do this again, actually, bring it up to a size 8. The reason being is this naval base is, for the most part, an early modern naval base. It's not really a modern industrial naval base. If we compare its size to, for example, the size of a French naval base in, I don't know, for example, like Marseille, which is a size 9, or a really big naval base, like the naval base at Portsmouth, which is 13, which is probably the biggest naval base I reckon in the world. I mean, Cherbourg is 7, Brest is 5. So the only military naval base that we have in Constantinople is very small, actually. So we want to begin to expand that. Size 7 now. I think let's have a look at whether or not we can sort of go ahead and it's not a harbour extension, is it? What is it? It's a military. That's why. Naval base extension. 80 state revenue, 16 steel, 21 manufactured goods. We'll leave it until we get a bit more manufactured goods, for sure. But that is something that we're going to be looking at doing, I think. The other thing we're going to start doing at the arsenal in Adrianople is to begin to look at building up fortress and garrison divisions. These are relatively cheap in the greater scheme of things. In fact, one of these I think we probably can do now. We will construct it. We're seeing now much more availability for manpower in Anatolia, which is really good. I think we'll build one in Smyrna, and then we can... No, we'll leave it for now. We are going to leave it, actually. We're going to allow our manpower to kind of restock for a period of time. But we are, at some point, going to start doing that, building up fortress troops, fortress artillery as well. These are quite expensive. These require a lot of manufactured goods. These are the things that inflict massive damage on forces that are attempting to assault fortresses. So that's the key thing, because they do a lot of the damage at range. So that's it. The economy's going well. Let's have a look at our economic economic indices. So still shifting: opium, manufactured goods, consistently tobacco. At the moment, I think the trouble in India is having a bit of an impact on cotton and wool, because it is probably disrupting the production of cotton in India, which is resulting in a really nice kind of, a really nice sort of revenue kind of creator for us. So we're now beginning to shift something which we've obviously not shifted in the past, really, in quite large quantities. We've stockpiled cotton and wool for nearly a decade now, and this stuff's starting to shift, which is really good to see. And again, I suspect it's due to the disruption in India with the kind of the ongoing mutiny there. So exports are always averaging at around 100. Not exports, beg your pardon. Domestic market sales always averaging at about 100, and always around 300 private revenue, which is really nice. Exports are starting to pick up again. We had a bit of a drop off at the end of last year. But beginning to pick up. 53 units of merchandise exported for just under 150 revenue, and that's really nice. And imports are pretty much set now at 43 for 114, and that's kind of what we need to actually sustain our industrial economy at this point. Those imports are all necessary things. They are iron, coal, small amounts of steel, and also mechanical parts for our factories and that kind of thing, which we can't yet manufacture ourselves. We don't have the technique yet, but that is something that hopefully we will develop soon. That's it. We're kind of 2 years off from 1860. As I say, it's nice to be playing and not to be kind of constantly worrying about conflicts and stuff like that. Over the next year, we are going to start developing a bit of a plan. War Plan Green Topaz, which will be obviously a defensive war against Russia. We're going to start thinking about what we would do in the event of a war if Russia attacked us, declared war on us, and what measures we need to take. We're also in the next year going to start looking at a possible defensive war against France. They might have declared war. I hope they don't, but I would assess that France and Russia at this stage are the two biggest threats. Of course, we remember that during the Austrian War we had the Maronite Rebellion in the Lebanon. And the French press, the Western press generally made a lot of the fact that we sent a governor. The governor was okay, a bit heavy-handed, but the French press went absolutely bonkers, got really disproportionate about it all, and started talking about how France should intervene. And even more concerning, the French government didn't dismiss this, but started making noises about how they considered themselves, sort of the guardians of Christians in the Middle East. And that's obviously fanciful stuff, but we have to draw conclusions from that and think about what France might do. I mean, I assume that any such conflict would probably be in North Africa. One interesting thing here is that it looks like the kind of the battle, if you like, between France and Piedmont Sardinia to try and develop a dominant position in Tunis has kind of resulted in the local kind of Tunisian Bey, who at one point took orders from Constantinople, really moving against the French and the Italians. They've actually they're destroying their trade posts, their missions, all this kind of thing, and we're gradually moving in. We didn't really intend to colonize Tunisia, but we've built a mission in Gabes, in Gafsa, and we're starting to get reasonable colonial penetration, not yet in Tunis itself, but in Tunis we can actually look at doing something there. We've got a mission in Tunis itself. So we're actually developing a bit of a position here, which is interesting. I think that we'll try and keep it and look at it really as possibly just a buffer. If we can maintain, I think, the independence of Tunis, that would serve our purpose for the time being anyway. And at some point, maybe we could reincorporate, Tunisia into the empire. This would cause, some conflict with France, but increasingly, as time goes on, as we industrialize and develop, we have to keep in mind that, look, countries like Britain and France, don't care too much about sort of, the possibility that they might get in conflict with each other. There's always possibility that these powers will get into conflict with each other because of overlapping interests. And there's just got to be overlapping interests. We have overlapping interests with Britain, for example, in the Persian Gulf, and also in Aden. These are areas that the British also have an interest in. They haven't done much about it. They constantly kind of try and bribe chiefs and stuff in Kuwait, which is annoying because it causes our colonial penetration just to atrophy enough for us not to be able to kind of move this into full colony status. So it is irritating. But in any case, we've maintained really good relations with Britain for the most part, despite the fact that we have overlapping interests. So it is eminently possible that we could, maybe the next 5 to 10 years, look to bring Tunisia back into the fold, and that would be really, really good. Another thing to look at, of course, is Algiers. Now, the kind of decaying, isolated Western European power, Spain, is trying to make kind of headway in Morocco, and I don't think they have any business being in Morocco, frankly. France also has interests there, and so does Prussia, actually. This is an area of, overlapping kind of claims and this sort of thing, but it's an economically interesting area. There's a possibility of kind of, there's dyes, cereals. It's not the most affluent place, but it's certainly a place that, that is of interest to us. So at some point, maybe looking to get a bit of colonial penetration in Morocco might be worthwhile. The commodities there don't make it like it's not a huge necessity. It would be much more of a prestige thing in the long term. And in the last analysis, our most pressing concern, really, in the next 5 years, is to lift the colonial penetration in the kind of Persian Gulf holdings and also the Hejaz to convert these regions into colonial status, and Kuwait. So Kuwait, Persian Gulf territories, and Hejaz between now and say 1865. It would be reasonable to try and get most of these into full colony status. So they have the same status as basically Syria, Iraq, and they can be integrated much more effectively into our economy. So that's definitely going to be a plan. The other area of interest, obviously, first of all, we want stability in the western part of Yemen. Stability, and begin to prosecute anti-insurgency campaigns, essentially against the local populace. So military expeditions designed to pacify retaliatory moves and stuff like this. We're going to have to do this long term to bring down the revolt risk and to begin to properly pacify this region before we begin to kind of look to the eastern part of Yemen and begin to kind of consolidate that as well. That's going to be an ongoing process, but it is going to mean that it's going to be much more of a kind of static. I think what we hold here is what we're going to hold, but also Taiz, basically. And we're going to kind of wall them off at sort of Hadramaut. We might even try and get a position in Hadramaut, I don't know. But anyway, that's the plan, really. That means that we're not going to spend too much more here, really. It's just going to be military pacification. I'm not going to keep doling out resources for merchants and trade posts, and these things just get the merchants get killed, the missions get sort of missionaries get lynched, and everything is kind of destroyed. We don't want that. It's too expensive. So long-term pacification, but the other area, of course, of interest, this is something that provides much more concrete gain. This is much more colonization because of its economic utility. And that's, of course, access to dyes, timbers, even tobacco, bit of tea, definitely, you know, an area that I think is quite an exciting development for us, and it's just a Dutch influenced territory. The Dutch probably have almost enough colonial penetration here to try and move for protectorate status, which, you know, we don't have. But once we get enough colonial penetration, we can stop that happening. We can lay a stake to the area. And if not, we could just try and outright begin to militarily occupy a part of it, frankly, and see what they think about that. But yeah, that's an interesting kind of proposition for the next few years. It'll be a long-term project, this. But as long as we don't get locals revolting against us, as long as we can establish ourselves in there, that'll be something that would pay for itself long-term. That's it. That's pretty much our kind of first quarterly report for 58. The only other thing to quickly report on foreign policy wise is it looks like Austria has regained Vienna from the Italians, and you know, yeah, I mean, Piedmont, Sardinia now, without us kind of, you know, distracting the entire Austrian force, is by the looks of it beginning to feel the weight of Austrian arms. The Austrians have made a bit of a recovery, it seems, militarily at least anyway. And they are beginning to kind of, they've recaptured Milan, for example. We're going to keep a really careful eye on Central Austria. Look at how they sort of economically recover, what's being built. The first thing we've noticed that's been built is they've reopened a gems field just outside Prague. But we're going to keep a careful eye on Austria, because Austria could be a long-term project as well. You know, what just went down with Austria, that may not be the end of it, you know. And sure enough, at some point, the green shoots of recovery will become visible, and yeah, we want to keep a careful eye on that. All the railroads that we destroyed have been reconstructed now. We destroyed all the railroads and completely disabled their transport system as we left. They've all been reconstructed, but they kind of automatically reconstructed by military units that are just present in the area, you know. So yeah, we'll keep an eye. We'll keep a careful eye, and at some point we might, you know, many years from now, a decade or 15 or 20 years from now, look to re-intervene in the Austrian Empire, maybe this time press for much more serious concessions, maybe look at, you know, dismantling the Austrian Empire as a kind of, you know, a necessary long-term kind of geopolitical goal. So that's something that we want to keep an eye on. The Prussians are heavily involved in a war with the Low Countries. They're at war with both Belgium and Holland. I mean, what they're looking to gain out of that, I don't know. I can imagine at some point that might antagonize the French. I can easily see, you know, the grounds being laid here for a sort of Franco-Prussian conflict, but I don't know. See what happens there. Russia's war against Sweden continues. Russia now decisively holds the upper hand. They're in Stockholm. I don't know what kind of claims they're pressing on Sweden, but yeah, Sweden has now been reduced to really the Norwegian bits of the Norwegian coastline. So that war, I think, is on the clock. I can see that ending in the next 6 months to the next year or something like that. We left the war with really high national morale. That remains high. It will gradually return to sort of 100. And we're sitting at 6,000 prestige points, which puts us at the 5th ranked power on Earth. Russia is 3rd. Who is 4th? Can't actually see who 4th is. Could be a power that's not listed on there, I suppose. Possibly China. I don't know. But anyway, we're behind that power. But yeah, so we're doing very well indeed. Next video will be, I guess, March, April, May time, 1858, unless absolutely nothing happens. But I'll give a kind of, update report then. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.